Okay, I have before me what I would consider the 10 essential books on ritual abuse. In a comment section, I think last month, someone was asking if I would do like some top 10 lists or top 5 lists or whatever of certain book topics. So here you go. These are what I would consider the top 10, and there's some leeway in here, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these are probably 10 of the more essential books on the topic of ritual abuse in support of that case. Now, as I go through, I'll get into some more details about this, but this is, of course, by no means an exhaustive list. So if you're curious about this topic, look elsewhere on my page. I've got a lot of other book reviews, and I'll link to some on the end screen. Now, this is the first one I got on the topic. This is Blasphemous Rumors. And I got this book originally because I was having dinner with some friends, and it was actually friends of my ex wife. And during our after dinner discussion, this the wife of this couple launched into this tirade against CPS, which CPS is definitely prone to a lot of other political intrigue, but her main thrust of what she was saying was that she didn't believe that child abuse, especially sadistic child abuse, just didn't exist and just wasn't a thing. And that was the first time I'd ever heard someone actually articulate that as like that just doesn't exist, like that's all made up. Now, the funny thing about that is, first of all, I had come from a background through the better part of the 1990s. I worked in a therapeutic group home with kids, and some of those kids came from cases just like this. And when you work with children in that kind of setting, and you see the actual human collateral of sadistic abuse, you don't walk away. It's impossible to walk away from that thinking, oh, this is an urban legend. And I never had kids make grand disclosures to me that were like recovered memories or anything like that. In fact, I only remember on just a very few rare occasions where a kid would make a disclosure to me, and of course we would have to write up incident reports on that and everything. But typically, the only way we knew about the particulars of some of the abuse cases was through the case files when we'd be introduced to a child, and you're going to be dealing with little Billy, and little Billy has a history of X, Y, and Z, so you need to be really careful about these things around little Billy, things like that. So outside of that, the kids didn't make any grand disclosure or claims or anything like that. So a lot of the attitude of people that promote that satanic panic mentality are blatantly ignorant of that therapeutic childcare world. And it always surprises me when I encounter that there's even people. To me, that's right up there with like disbelieving that the sun is shining down on us. But anyway, so this was the first book I got on the topic, and this is more of a compilation of ritual abuse cases from the throughout the late 80s and 90s into the early 90s, mainly in the UK. And this, I believe, is from 1991. This is Blasphemous Rumors by Andrew Boyd from 1991. And this is one I've looked for it in hardcover because my poor little paperback is getting kind of worn out. But this is an excellent overview of the subject. So I actually ordered this after this girl had said this at this party, talking about how that just wasn't a thing. And then, lo and behold, a couple of months later, I found out she and her husband were being investigated for child abuse or child neglect. So make of that whatever you will. I didn't know them well enough to really have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I did find that curious when, after that, her very impassioned declaration that any kind of sadistic abuse is urban legend material. I remember being so shocked. I was like, but anyway. So moving right along, this is another British publication. This is by Diane Core. This is Chasing Satan. Excellent book on the topic, fairly quick read. One of the interesting things about her, the reason she is included in this stack, is she does a good job of explaining the relationship between ritual abuse and pedophile gangs or child prostitution rings, and also implicates some NATO employees in part of this. So there's some really interesting stuff there. And she comes off as a very serious social worker, writer, researcher, whatever you want to say. I believe she was working as a social worker when she produced this book. But she takes a very no-nonsense approach about other researchers and doesn't seem like somebody that takes a lot of crap off anybody. But she's definitely one that I would love to talk to if she's still around about her attitude about some of the stuff today, where she's at, what all she's seen, because I guarantee you this is somebody that could tell you some stories right here of having seen some things. Now, moving right along, this is something of a unicorn. This one is not cheap, but it's out there. You can find it. Tim Tate's book, Children for the Devil. This one is hard to find. This was actually pulled from circulation. Tim Tate was sued by I believe an occult bookstore owner or a police officer. I can't remember which. It was someone mentioned in this book. It might have been a police officer that felt like his portrayal in the book was libelous or slanderous or whatever. Tim Tate claims that he stood by his material that he published, but the publisher did not. And the publisher did not want to take a chance on fighting it in court, so they withdrew this book from circulation. So if you're like me and you're lucky, you can find an actual hardback copy of this. These are very rare and usually go for at least a couple $100. But the next best thing is you can also find PDF versions of this floating around on the internet. And of special interest here is his documentation, mainly it's a lot of ritual abuse cases from the United States as well as the UK, but he documents some ritual abuse cases in the UK involving tunnels under wealthy homes where kids were, and a lot like some of the stuff that's come out in recent years, kids saying that they were trafficked to these rich elite homes and they were using tunnels to do this. And the tunnels were one of the ways that the stories were discredited because that sounded so outlandish. And then he actually went to a museum that had records of old mining tunnels in the area, and there actually were mining tunnels that corresponded with exactly where the kids said. His section on the McMartin preschool case is excellent. It's worth it for that. But excellent book, very well done. And this is one of those that came out at the height of what is typically called the Satanic Panic. And when you read books like this or Diane Core's Chasing Satan, it's the whole Satanic Panic thing really doesn't hold up. And you'll see that even in that era, authors were treading very carefully and going to great efforts to make sure it was understood where they were at on certain topics, and making sure that you knew that this was not just a sensational, collection of urban legends or something. Now, also, of course, in that era in the 80s and 90s, one of the big players in all that was the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And that was a group made up of a lot of people who had been accused by their children of sadistic abuse. And then, lo and behold, they form an organization to discredit all the people coming forward, all the victims of sadistic abuse. And Lynn Crook's book is excellent on this. This came out fairly recently. This is from, I saw her interviewed on Nick Bryant's podcast. This is from 2022. Excellent book. Lynn Crook, this is False Memories, The Deception That Silenced Millions. And this is about her personal story of having recovered memories about abuse of her father, fighting him in court, dealing with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And oddly enough, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation dissolved very quietly and without any fanfare in 2019. And it's interesting to note that false memory syndrome is not based on any kind of actual medical or psychological evidence. This is purely a political device that is used to discredit victims. It has no actual bearing or no actual footing in mind science, so to speak. Now, this one is very similar. This is a little older book. This one I think is from 91 or so, or no, 1996. This is The Truth About False Memory Syndrome. And this is by James G. Frison, PhD. Excellent book that you can't read this and have any respect for the False Memory Syndrome Foundation afterwards, because all he's doing is just laying out their bona fides and what they're all about, who they are, and some of their history. One of the main people, just some of the main players in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the main key participants in that, and the founding members, all came from very shady backgrounds. In fact, I can't remember the name of which couple it was, but one of them was even publishing a pornographic magazine aimed at people with underage tastes, shall we say. And they just so happen to be board members of this. So, moving right along, there's Satan's Silence. Now, I have a few books like this. This is one that's more of a debunking book that is all about the satanic panic, and it's the Satan's Silence, Ritual Abuse and the Making of a Modern Witch Hunt. And of course, we got Debbie Nathan and Michael Snedeker. I think I'm saying his name right. And also, if you can't find this one, these are readily available. Boy, they want you. Amazon really wants you to get this book or Remembering Satan. These are the two that really pop up a lot when you're doing searches for this kind of stuff. I mainly throw this out there because when you start reading actual case histories and reading up on a lot of these ritual abuse cases, books like this are laughable in their desperate attempt to steer you away from this. This is really intended for someone in the general public that has no real understanding of this child abuse or any of that, and basically just to make them go back to sleep or not wake up at all. So you just go back to your TV and watch some your favorite talk show. But this is designed to keep you from getting too curious. And Remembering Satan is really curious because that's all about a ritual abuse case up in Washington State, where the guy actually confessed. He was a chief of police that actually confessed to doing this. So I think he was a chief of police. I can't remember all the particulars right off the top of my head. But the interesting thing about the Remembering Satan book is at the very end of the book, I think it's in the postscript there, it talks about how they came up with some of the content of some of the interviews that are quoted in the book. And he admits to taking extensive artistic license with these interviews and had basically severely edited a lot of the content for the purpose of the book. And when you read the way, just the example he gives, the way the response was edited gives a totally different feel to the interview. So when you read that, and I bet a lot of the people that bought Remembering Satan didn't read that far in the book and didn't realize like a lot of this stuff that you're assuming as you're reading this, that you're reading actual court transcripts, and you're not. And he doesn't admit that till the very back of the book. So moving right along, this is one of the victim accounts I'd recommend. As far as this is, and again, there's a lot of different victim accounts out there. This one is noteworthy in that this is Hell Minus One by Ann A. Johnson Davis. And she suffered severe abuse at the hands of her mom and her stepdad. And this is interesting in that her parents, or her mom and stepdad, confessed and actually wrote a written confession to the Mormon Church to try to regain their standing and not be excommunicated from the Mormon Church. Now, in light of the Bishop Pace memo, which is another subject entirely, that's even more curious. But this is a very interesting case in that you have the perpetrators corroborate her story. So, very tragic case. This is one of those books that definitely have a good palate cleanser nearby, something lighthearted to read or watch, because this is really a sad, tragic tale. And it's heartbreaking to read some of this stuff and know that this stuff is actively happening. Now, this is more broad in scope. This is Colts That Kill by Larry Kahaner. And excellent book just on cult violence in general, the just occult crime in general. Everything from, he has a section on cattle mutilation to ritual abuse cases and just witchcraft in general, but just a good overview of a lot, and a good, well-balanced overview to a lot of stuff. Now, if you can't get Children for the Devil, which you probably can't because that's something of a unicorn, and you want to still read up on the McMartin preschool case, I highly recommend By Silence Betrayed. This is an excellent book on just child abuse in general and just all the problems of modern child abuse. And he does a lot of different case studies throughout the book. This is by John Crudson from 1988. And this is another good one to read that's from that era of allegedly satanic panic and all. So it's good to read the stuff from that era and see for yourself if, in fact, you find this to be sensational, crazy material. So yes, this is from 1988 by John Crudson, By Silence Betrayed, Sexual Abuse of Children in America. Excellent book on, again, just the whole topic of child abuse, but some really good specifics about the McMartin preschool case. This is an excellent one to read, especially if you find yourself wondering if that was in fact some kind of mass hysteria. This will change your opinion really quick. Now, Cult Ritual Abuse by James Randall Noblitt and Pamela Sue Perskin. This is an excellent introductory book, and there's several versions of this. I would recommend, if you can get your hands on the first edition, the later he did a follow-up book on this that is an excellent book, and I've reviewed it elsewhere on this channel, but it's an almost entirely different book. So it's good in its own right, but this, for those of you that are looking into this and trying to kind of get your footing on what all is going on with this, this is an excellent introduction to the topic. And I found this to be of special interest to me because growing up in and around the Richardson, Texas area, and that's my little nervous dog over there, he talks about a lot of cases that were happening in the Dallas area and treating a lot of people who in and around the area of my childhood. So I'll have to come back to this at some point because there's some really fascinating stuff I'd like to get into a little bit deeper on this topic. But anyway, that's Cult and Ritual Abuse by James Randall Noblitt, and I believe it's his wife, Pamela Sue Perskin. And this is from, this was from 2000. But excellent book. And last but not least, this is the only one in this stack that could be construed as something of a sensational take on it, and mainly the cover art. But this is a great overview of a lot of ritual abuse and satanic occult crime kind of books, cases, by Carl A. Raschke, I think. Raschke, I'm not sure how you say his name, but I believe this is from the late 80s. Let's see. This is a great, from 1990. This one is one of the few I found that goes into the murder of Stephen Newberry by his friends. One of them, I think, Pete Rowland and Tom Hardy. I'm not sure if I'm remembering all their names. John Hardy might have been one of them. But these kids were taught, like the main ringleader, I think his name was Hardy. He was like the top of his class. These were not stupid kids. These weren't some kind of weird band of outcasts. These were top kids. And I believe Hardy was the one that was actively recruiting his fellow students to become Satanists. And this was well known amongst his peers. This wasn't some kind of urban legend. And they wound up killing one of their buddies with baseball bats, Stephen Newberry. And then they got caught and they confessed. So you can't say that this is some kind of, satanic panic or they forced these guys to confess. Not in any way, shape, or form. And interesting that case, the Stephen Newberry murder, this is one of the few places that I've seen this really detailed. So it's worth it for that alone. But this is a good breakdown of a lot of different cases of occult crime and ritual abuse from the 80s. And it's always good to see, again, the way this stuff was treated and written about in that era. So you can see for yourself, was it being sensationally presented? So anyway, that's Painted Black. That is the last one on that stack. So again, those are my top 10. And again, my main point in this stack of literature is not to be a comprehensive, like the be-all, end-all of ritual abuse, but if you were starting out in researching the topic or wanted 10 really critical books on the subject, this would be a good starting point. And like I said, I've tried to throw out some good alternatives like Silence Betrayed to Tim Tate's Children for the Devil. So those of you that are on a budget, that's a good way to get some of this information without spending a small fortune on Tim Tate's book. So there you go, top 10 books on ritual abuse. I hope that was helpful. And if you like that, I'll do another top 10 on a different subject at a different time. So thanks for watching.